We're starting on the urinary and reproductive system material now, and here on the board we have two different stages of early embryonic development, and we want to emphasize the position of the intermediate mesoderm right here. Right there and right there. Remember, we have the ectoderm, the surface ectoderm on the surface, neural crest tissue, neural tube, notochord mesoderm, somite mesoderm, intermediate mesoderm, then the somatic and splanchnic layers of mesoderm out to the side, and the orange line here is the endoderm layer. So that's the early embryo stage, and it's in this intermediate mesoderm right here and right here that we have the beginnings of kidneys, the gonads, and the tubules that are responsible for urinary and reproductive systems. They develop from that right there. The somites, remember, are segmental. So you have a somite, then a gap, then a somite, then a gap. So they're like chunks, pieces that go down the back of the developing body. But the intermediate mesoderm is not divided up like the somites. It's a continuous strip that runs down the back. And so over here we see it again. It's just dorsal to the body cavity. This would be the gut right here. Put a G in there for gut. And this is coelom. Put a C in there for coelom on either side. And that's the dorsal mesentery between the two sides of the coelom attached to the gut. So anyway, we have that mesentery there. We have the dorsal body wall here at the back of the coelom, and that's where we find those strips of intermediate mesoderm. They run the length of the abdominal cavity from near the cloaca up into the body quite a ways. Those intermediate mesoderm. So we're going to be looking at that not from a cross-sectional view, but from a frontal view, looking in from the front of the animal toward that intermediate mesoderm in the next picture. So here we are looking at that nephric tissue. This is the intermediate mesoderm, two strips of intermediate mesoderm against the back wall of the coelom right here. So that's the very beginning of what we think of as kidney tissue and associated structures. In my next picture here, I didn't shade it in, but we still have those same shapes. And within that, we get the formation of a tube we call the mesonephric duct. Mesonephric duct that leads all the way back here to the cloaca. So there's our cloaca back here in the back. The cloaca also has connections to the allantois and to the gut. That little circle there indicates the lower end of the digestive tube. So they're both emptying into this common space, the cloaca, in the back. So we start off with just kind of undifferentiated bands of tissue, this intermediate mesoderm, and then we get this structure here where we have that intermediate mesoderm to begin to form this kidney tissue, this early kidney tissue. The mesonephric ducts form within that, and then soon after they start to form those mesonephric ducts, we start to form some little tubules that are the beginnings of nephric tubules, kidney tubules that are responsible for kidney function, the processing of nitrogenous waste, whatever the kidney is going to be used for, osmotic balance and all that good stuff. So this is the beginning of a kidney structure, and we're going to refer to this as a mesonephric kidney. And these small tubules that start in here, these early kidney tubules, we refer to as mesonephric tubules. Mesonephric tubules. So this is the beginning of some early tissue forming a kidney. This kind of kidney, this mesonephric kidney, persists in fish and amphibians, but if it's a reptile, bird, or mammal, all this kidney tissue will be lost. When we were like really small, just a few centimeters in length, we had a mesonephric kidney that was fairly large compared to the rest of our tiny little body there, made up a substantial portion of our developing embryonic body. But it's quickly replaced with another kind of kidney, our metanephric kidney, which we'll show here in a minute. So anyway, this is what we begin with. In the next picture, we will show the addition of the reproductive structures that develop from these same tissues from the intermediate mesoderm. Here in this picture, we have the same kidneys, the mesonephric kidneys coming down here, the mesonephric ducts in brown, mesonephric tubules, the little dashes in there, brown dashes, cloaca back here, just like we had in the previous image. But up here we have gonads now. It's undifferentiated in this particular view. So the male or female system would look exactly the same. No real difference between males and females at this stage of development, and the gonad is not producing either eggs or sperm at that stage of development. There's a new duct that forms here, shown in the purple color, and this is called a Mullerian duct. The Mullerian duct. Now, in the next illustrations, we will see some changes occurring to this undifferentiated kind of urinary and reproductive system, this internal urinary and reproductive system. Off of the lower end of the mesonephric duct down here, we're going to develop a new kidney right off this lower end right here. We're going to grow a new kidney. It's going to come out as first a little bud, and then it's going to form a regular kidney and become separate from the mesonephric tubule eventually. That's going to become a ureter and the kidney in an amniote animal. The Mullerian duct will persist if it's a female and become the oviducts and uterus in the female. If it's a male, the mesonephric duct will persist and become the ductus deferens, the main sperm carrying duct. So the gonad, if it stays a male, will use this tube, the mesonephric duct. If it's a female, it's going to use this tube. Now, if it's a male, Mullerian duct will disappear. If it's a female, the mesonephric duct will disappear and be completely lost. So that's where we're going next, looking at formation of the kidney, looking at male development from this, or looking at female development from this undifferentiated stage. Here we see three progressive stages in the early development of female reproductive system. So if we designate this as being female and no longer undifferentiated, we know these are going to be ovaries up here. So here's an ovary. We still have a mesonephric kidney here. We have the mesonephric duct. We have the Mullerian duct. All those things were in the prior illustrations we saw. Down here we have these little outgrowths from the lower portion of the mesonephric duct in dark brown. This is going to be called a metanephric bud. Metanephric bud, and of course this is still cloaca down here. So that accounts for most of this illustration. Very much like the last one we saw, we're just designating this now as female to see what goes on from here. So we still have two ovaries, two Mullerian ducts, we still have our mesonephric ducts, but we see this outgrowth from the metanephric bud, so that now this can be called a metanephric duct. Which is the same thing as a ureter. And this is our metanephric kidney. running things together there. But anyway, metanephric kidney, metanephric bud. Everything else is pretty much the same. Since this is female, we're going to use these Mullerian ducts as oviducts and uterus components eventually. And the mesonephric kidney is no longer going to be of any use to us. It's going to disappear, and these tiny mesonephric ducts that are in here are going to fade away. So here's still our mesonephric duct. But it's degenerating. It'll soon be gone. So we have a complete ureter and kidney forming. We're still connected to the cloaca. We'll see changes in that later on. But anyway, at this stage, we have the two ovaries, two Mullerian ducts that will become oviduct and uterus, two kidneys, metanephric kidneys now, not mesonephric kidneys, and formation of a ureter from that metanephric duct. So that's the female. Now look at the male. So the changes you see in the male reproductive system, again, going back to kind of an in-between stage here, we're going to designate this a male now and call this a testis up here. So we have the two mesonephric kidneys with mesonephric ducts. We've got a Mullerian duct over here, and we're showing this with the metanephric kidneys already growing out from the lower part of the mesonephric duct. So we know we're going to lose our mesonephric kidney, and I've drawn them over here with a dotted red line in this image here. But we're going to keep our mesonephric duct, and our mesonephric duct here is going to be used as the primary sperm-carrying duct between the testis and the urethra. So this duct right here is going to be called the ductus deferens. Sometimes called the vas deferens, but anyway, that's what becomes of the mesonephric duct. That is the same thing. It's the mesonephric duct. We still have a ureter or metanephric duct here. Ureter, I can't spell. Ureter, metanephric kidney. Here, the Mullerian ducts, I've drawn little dashes in here to indicate that they're going away. They're going to be lost. The mesonephric kidney is lost as well. So we have testes, we have the ductus deferens from the mesonephric duct, we have the new metanephric kidney. The connection to the cloaca between the metanephric duct and the mesonephric duct is now separate. Let's draw the cloaca in here. So here's the cloacal space down here. They have separate connections. So anyway, we'll talk more about what goes on with those connections at the cloaca later on. Remember, the allantois is connected there. That will become eventually the bladder, and then these other ducts are connected here as well. So that's the beginnings of the male reproductive system. No more Mullerian ducts, they're gone. No mesonephric kidney. We keep our mesonephric ducts and use them as sperm-conducting ducts for the testis. In these two drawings, we have lateral views from the side of the developing lower cloacal region, the connections to mesonephric ducts, metanephric ducts, and Mullerian ducts, and all that. So let's label a few things to get us started. First of all, this common space right here and right here would be the cloacal space. Now, when there's a single opening to the outside where you don't have the different digestive, urinary, reproductive tubes opening in separate places, we can refer to this common opening right here as the vent. Sometimes it's given other names, cloacal aperture and some other things. But anyway, this right up here is the allantois. still connected to the cloaca right there. This is the intestine. Next, we have the mesonephric duct. Here's the Mullerian duct. In purple. Here's our metanephric bud right here. Let's see if I can write that in somewhere. The metanephric bud. Notice the metanephric bud is still connected to the mesonephric duct, and they both connect to the side of the cloaca here. Mullerian duct also connects to the cloaca. Intestine drains into the cloaca. Allantois is connected to the cloaca. So several, that'd be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different passageways that terminate in the cloaca. Left and right Mullerian, left and right mesonephric duct, intestine, allantois. In the next picture, we see this increasing separation of the allantoic space and the intestine and reduction of the cloaca. So we call this right here the urorectal fold. Goes by some other names, but that's one name for it. It's this partition that separates the cloaca. It's going to divide it completely into a urogenital sinus in the front, rectum in the back part of that. Okay? The only other major change we see here is the growth of the metanephric kidney. The metanephric kidney developing there. So these are both undifferentiated, meaning they are both representing the male and the female at this stage of development. We don't have anything that makes them distinctly male or female in the drawing. We're going to next go to a series of drawings for both male and female and show how they differ from this point onward. So we have a series of 3 drawings here that are female, a series of 3 down here that represent male development, and just a few important things to point out in the changes that occur in the cloacal region and in the connection of the tubes, the ducts, as we go through this. First of all, if this is female here, we didn't draw it all the way up to where the gonad would be, so the gonad is off the image right here. We have the metanephric kidney. We do not have a mesonephric kidney, so the mesonephric kidney and mesonephric duct are gone. We keep the Mullerian duct, and they attach to this part here, which is now going to be called urogenital sinus. Urogenital sinus, and this over here is going to be the rectum. So our cloaca no longer exists, it's completely split. In the next picture, we see the upper part of the allantois becoming the urinary bladder. We have the metanephric kidney connected here. This is ureter. This is kidney. I won't bother to call it metanephric kidney any longer. Down here, our Mullerian duct is now becoming uterus and oviduct. In humans, you see a fusion of the Mullerian ducts coming together to make the uterus. In other animals, not so much, sometimes. So this down here is still urogenital sinus and rectum over there. All right, where the uterus meets the urogenital sinus right there, we have a thickening of tissue that is going to help to develop the vaginal canal. And as that happens, we see further separation of the urethra from the reproductive tract. And so we end up over here with two different openings. This is no longer called a urogenital sinus. This is simply a urethra. In this part and here, now we have this section derived mostly from the wall of the old cloaca or urogenital sinus, and that's vagina. There, then uterus, and then oviduct, and there's our ovary. It came down, it drops down during development to that position. We have our urinary bladder up there. This little tag right here, can't remember if it's IS or US. I think it's US. Urachus. It's kind of an embryonic ligament that still attaches to the belly button, essentially the umbilical region inside. So anyway, that's not a major anatomical component in the adult, but it's something we identify at this stage, the urachus. We still have rectum from the digestive tube back there. So anyway, the main thing going on here is the separation of the urogenital sinus now into two passages, separate urethra and vagina. That does not happen in the male. We don't see that kind of separation. In the male, the next column across here, we lose that Mullerian duct and we keep the mesonephric duct. We have the mesonephric duct and we have the metanephric duct. Also known as the ureter. So we have urogenital sinus out front. Connection to the allantois that will become the bladder. And we have the rectum, of course, back here again. In the next picture, not much going on that's different. We have enlargement of the allantois to form the urinary bladder. This segment right here, it could be called urogenital sinus, but we don't usually call it urogenital sinus. It is a urogenital sinus, but we usually just refer to it as the urethra in males. So this is equivalent to a urogenital sinus in this area. We see a change in position of the connection of the mesonephric duct and the metanephric duct right here. So we see this swap so that these change positions. I kind of like to draw some arrows in there, but that would make things even messier. So the metanephric duct, which was below the mesonephric duct, is now up above it, attached to the wall of the bladder. The mesonephric duct is going to connect to the urethra just below the bladder. That's the way that's going to work. And in my final picture, you have basically the same thing. We have the urachus right up here. We have the urinary bladder. We have the urethra. We have the connection right here of the ureter coming in. And then here we have the connection of the duct we're going to now. We could have called it that over here, I guess. But anyway, that's our ductus deferens. Connected to our testis right there. Testis is dropping down, and it'll drop even further, of course, in the anatomy. So anyway, that's what's going on with the separation of the cloaca. In the female, it is going to form urethra, vagina, and rectal passages. In the male, we keep this urogenital sinus, and we simply refer to it as urethra, and the rectum separate. But this part does not divide into separate urinary and reproductive parts. We keep the connection to the reproductive system through the ductus deferens there, where we're going to develop eventually a prostate gland right there.